America produced over 40% of the world's goods, and with just $1,000, anyone could control $10,000 worth of stocks. The official story says the Roaring Twenties were pure progress until a sudden crash rewrote history. But buried in these numbers is the real reason the Great Depression followed a 7-stage pattern, and the warning signs we still ignore. So what did everyone miss as prosperity turned to crisis? In the years after World War I, American industry shifted gears with astonishing speed. Factories that once built rifles and tanks now turned out washing machines, radios, and automobiles, filling homes with the sights and sounds of a new era. Assembly lines in Detroit ran around the clock, sending millions of Model T cars rolling onto city streets and country roads. Pittsburgh's steel mills poured out beams for skyscrapers that seemed to climb higher every season, reshaping skylines from Chicago to New York. By the mid-1920s, the United States accounted for more than 40% of the world's manufactured goods, outpacing Britain, Germany, and France combined, and setting a pace that felt unstoppable. Cities became laboratories for modern life. Electric wires crisscrossed rooftops and alleys, bringing power to neighborhoods that had always known only the flicker of gas lamps or the dim glow of candles. Refrigerators hummed in kitchens where iceboxes once stood. Radios became the centerpiece of family rooms, broadcasting jazz, news, and baseball games from coast to coast, shrinking the country into a single, humming network of voices and music. New appliances promised to lighten the load of daily chores, and the rhythm of life itself seemed to quicken. The transformation reached deep into rural America. On farms, tractors and combines replaced horses and hand tools, turning days of back-breaking labor into hours behind the wheel. Crop yields soared, and with them, the hope that the old cycle of drought and debt might finally be broken. Rural towns paved their first roads, built new schools, and watched as telegraph poles and electric lines crept across the landscape. For many, the prosperity of the city seemed within reach at last. Industrial giants like General Electric and U.S. Steel became household names, their stocks discussed at kitchen tables and barbershops. Business leaders spoke of a future where machines would free workers from drudgery, promising higher wages and shorter hours. Newspapers ran stories of record profits and rising factory pay, fueling the belief that progress was not just possible, but inevitable. Optimism swept through every corner of the country. Politicians promised a new American century, built on innovation and hard work. Banks opened new branches, and construction cranes dotted the horizon as buildings rose in every major city. Consumer demand soared, and the appetite for new goods seemed insatiable. With so much new wealth in the air, confidence grew quietly but steadily. Downturns felt like relics of another age. The rush to modernize, electrify, and mechanize had made the nation richer than ever before, and few paused to wonder what might happen if the current ever shifted. The hunger for more comfort, more convenience, more opportunity became the spirit of the age. Soon, that spirit would find a new engine, the promise of easy credit waiting just around the corner. Credit changed the American economy in ways that few understood at the time. By the late 1920s, installment plans were everywhere. Shoppers could walk into a store, pick out a refrigerator, a radio, or a car, and walk out after signing a slip that promised to pay a few dollars each month. By 1929, Americans owed more than $7 billion on these installment contracts, about 1 out of every $10 spent in retail. The new system made luxuries feel like necessities, and necessities suddenly seemed affordable. But the bills kept stacking up, even as wages lagged behind. On Wall Street, a different kind of borrowing took hold. Buying stocks on margin let ordinary people control 10 times as much stock as they could actually afford. With just $1,000 down, an investor could buy $10,000 worth of shares. The rest came from a loan, secured by the stocks themselves. As long as prices kept rising, everyone felt like a winner. But if prices dropped, even a little, the math turned deadly. A A 10% fall wiped out the investor's entire stake and triggered a margin call. Pay up immediately or lose everything. Brokers did not wait for explanations. They simply sold off the stocks, often at fire sale prices, to cover their own risks. The scale of this leverage was staggering. Broker loans soared from $3.5 billion in 1926 to $8.5 billion by the eve of the crash. That meant billions in borrowed money was riding on the hope that stocks would never fall. Much of this money flowed through the hands of Charles E. Mitchell, the powerful head of National City Bank. Mitchell's bank became the largest source of broker loans in the country, lending freely to investors and brokers alike. When the Federal Reserve warned about mounting risks, Mitchell brushed off their concerns, insisting that growth would continue and that fears of a bubble were overblown. Behind the scenes, banks poured more and more money into Wall Street, chasing higher returns from broker loans instead of funding new factories or farms. The entire financial system became intertwined with the fate of the stock market. For a while, it worked. Rising stock prices made everyone feel richer, but the foundation was shaky. It was prosperity built on IOUs, not earnings. As leverage spread, so did a sense of invincibility. The mechanics were invisible to most Americans. Few understood that a single bad week on Wall Street could force millions to repay debts they could never afford. In the rush for easy profit, the line between a healthy boom and a dangerous bubble blurred. The stage was set for a new kind of mania that would sweep the country and pull even more people into the market's orbit. Stock fever swept the country like a new dance craze. In barbershops, the hum of clippers faded beneath talk of U.S. Steel and Radio Corporation of America. Teachers clipped stock tables from the morning paper, swapping tips in the teacher's lounge. Cab drivers in Manhattan handed out advice on which shares to buy before you had even named your destination. The market was not just a place for the rich anymore. It was a national obsession, stitched into the fabric of daily life. Ticker tape headlines ran side by side with baseball scores. Headlines trumpeted new highs, and the ticker tape's chatter became the soundtrack of the age. Radios blared out closing prices each evening, turning living rooms into miniature trading floors. For the first time, investing felt like a game anyone could win. The excitement was contagious. From small towns in Iowa to the crowded blocks of Brooklyn, people pooled savings, borrowed from relatives, or signed up for margin accounts at the local brokerage. Shares in electric companies, radio manufacturers, and auto firms were snapped up not just by bankers and lawyers, but by waitresses, shopkeepers, and secretaries, each convinced they had found the ticket to easy fortune. Stories of overnight riches spread faster than facts. A neighbor's cousin made a killing on General Motors. A barber's client retired early thanks to a lucky bet on a new radio stock. The myth of the self-made millionaire was everywhere. Fueled by magazine profiles and radio interviews with market wizards. The line between sound investment and wild gamble blurred until almost no one could see it. Market advice became a kind of folk wisdom. Buy and hold. Never sell on a dip. If you missed one boom, another was coming. Brokers opened branch offices in hundreds of towns, their windows filled with flashing tickers and bold promises. Brokerage firms handed out booklets explaining how easy it was to buy on margin. Why wait to save when you could borrow and win big now? Even the language of the era changed. People talked about the market the way they talked about the weather. Everybody had an opinion, and nobody wanted to be left out. The sense of urgency grew as prices climbed. If you hesitated, someone else would snap up the next sure thing. This was more than a bubble. It was a mania, a kind of collective thrill that made risk feel like opportunity. The deeper the market rose, the more ordinary life revolved around its daily drama. The nation's imagination was hooked, and the rush for easy wealth pulled in millions who had never dreamed of calling themselves investors. Behind the headlines and the ticker tape, Wall Street's rise was anything but fair. A hidden force drove many of the era's most spectacular gains: the investment pool. These were secret alliances of powerful brokers, wealthy insiders, and well-placed journalists working together to engineer price surges in select stocks. Their methods were simple, but devastatingly effective. Pool members quietly bought up shares, passing them back and forth in brisk trades to make it look like real demand was surging. These wash sales created the illusion of excitement. Newspapers and radio stations, sometimes tipped off or even bribed, spread glowing stories about the chosen companies. The public, hungry for the next big winner, poured in their savings, chasing prices ever higher. No stock captured the spirit of the age quite like Radio Corporation of America, RCA. In early 1928, RCA traded at about $85 a share. By September 1929, it had soared to $505, a six-fold leap in less than 2 years. The story behind that climb was no accident. Michael J. Meehan, a broker with a knack for spectacle, led the most famous investment pool of the decade. Meehan and his circle bought up RCA shares in secret, then unleashed a flood of trades among themselves. Each transaction was carefully timed to catch the eyes of market reporters and the public. The tape showed a frenzy. The price chart traced a rocket. As the pool worked its magic, brokerage houses joined in, urging clients to buy before the next jump. Journalists ran stories about RCA's future, hinting at radio's limitless promise. The pool even coordinated with stock exchange specialists, insiders who controlled the flow of orders to keep the momentum alive. For a while, it worked perfectly. Volume spiked, headlines blared, and RCA became the darling of the market. Even seasoned investors struggled to tell real demand from the pool's manufactured excitement. But the mechanics of the game were rigged from the start. When the pool decided the price was high enough, they began to unload their shares, selling into the very demand they had created. Retail investors, drawn in by the spectacle, were left holding the bag. RCA's price collapsed, falling from its peak to just $26 in the months after the crash. The losses for ordinary buyers were staggering. Meehan's RCA pool was only the most visible example. Dozens of other stocks, from utilities to mining companies, were subject to the same playbook. Wash sales, tape painting, and rumor mongering became standard tools of the trade. With no real rules to stop them, pools flourished in the shadows, feeding the bubble and setting the stage for disaster. The market's outward confidence masked a deep fragility, one that would soon be exposed when the panic began. On the morning of October 24, 1929, Wall Street opened to a sound that traders would never forget: the roar of frantic voices, the clatter of orders, and the steady churn of the ticker tape. Sell orders poured in faster than the machines could handle. By midday, the ticker lagged more than an hour behind reality, its narrow paper ribbons spitting out prices that were already ancient history. Brokers and investors were left guessing, their nerves stretched tight as rumors raced ahead of information. As the panic spread, prices dropped like stones. U.S. Steel, the pride of American industry, plunged below $200 a share. Margin calls flooded offices, forcing those who had borrowed to buy stocks to sell at any price. The sense of control that had defined the boom years vanished in a matter of hours. Then, in the middle of the chaos, a figure cut through the crowd: Richard Whitney, vice president of the New York Stock Exchange. Acting on behalf of a pool of major banks, Whitney strode to the trading post for U.S. Steel and loudly placed an order: 25,000 shares at $205, well above the last sale. He repeated the gesture for other blue-chip stocks: AT&T at $252, General Electric, and more. The effect was immediate. For a moment, the market steadied, prices inched up. Word spread that the bankers were backing the market, and some of the panic eased. But the relief was only temporary. By the closing bell, a record 12.9 million shares had changed hands. The ticker did not finish printing the day's trades until nearly 7 p.m. The cracks in the market were now visible to everyone, and the sense of safety that had fueled the boom was gone. The country stood on the edge, waiting to see if the storm had passed or if something worse was coming. October 29, 1929 began with a rush of sell orders that never let up. From the opening bell, the New York Stock Exchange was overwhelmed. Brokers shouted into telephones, runners sprinted between offices, and the ticker tape lagged hopelessly behind, sometimes by more than 2 hours. By midday, the floor was a storm of panic. Margin clerks delivered thousands of calls, demanding cash from investors who had borrowed to buy stocks. Most couldn't pay, and their holdings were dumped onto the market at whatever price they could fetch. Stocks that had seemed untouchable just weeks before now found no buyers. Shares in blue-chip companies, once symbols of stability, fell in freefall. U.S. Steel, General Electric, and American Telephone and Telegraph all plummeted. Some stocks dropped 20, 30, even 40 points in a single hour. The volume of trading smashed every record. More than 16 million shares changed hands before the day was done. The previous high, set just days earlier, was left far behind. Outside, thousands crowded the sidewalks, straining for news. Police set up barricades to keep order as rumors of bankruptcies and ruined fortunes swept through the city. Inside brokerage houses, the mood shifted from disbelief to despair. By the closing bell, the losses were staggering. Nearly $14 billion in paper wealth erased in a single day. That sum, almost a tenth of the entire American economy, vanished in hours. For millions, the dream of easy riches was replaced by the hard reality of ruin. The crash was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it was total. Today, global debt has surpassed $300 trillion, and speculative booms still dominate headlines. Each financial cycle tempts us to believe we have outgrown old mistakes, but the warning signs never really change. Resilience depends on remembering that unchecked optimism and fragile trust can unravel even the mightiest economies. The pattern endures, waiting for those who ignore its lessons. What will we choose to see before the next storm breaks?